One often hears men say that the boss is at home, we need to ask. In the actual work scenario, the relationship between the boss and team members is critical. My simple point being that the moment two human beings have to interact with one another in any or most capacities, there is an extremely, albeit intangible, but very, very significant dynamic that is formed that can make or break that relationship. And when it comes to therapy and the therapeutic setting, by virtue of the fact that the client is essentially being naked, vulnerable, and exploring and exposing very, very intimate phases, stages, parts, emotions, feelings of themselves to who is practically a stranger at the other end, who is the therapist. It's fair to say that the dynamic in that therapeutic setting can have an even greater impact because so much of one's therapeutic and healing journey rests on a positive dynamic getting established. The tricky thing is that there is no one solution, is there? Because every therapist is different, we're all human, and every client is different. And therefore, in each individual therapeutic setting, client, and scenario, the therapist needs to be astute, aware, make certain accurate inferences, and construct that dynamic very carefully based on those insights so that it may create an environment most conducive for that client to benefit the most, and in fact, for the therapist as well to be able to help and guide and support the most. And that is why this is such a critical area that is perhaps not spoken about often enough. We are calling this edition of Talk Therapy Power-Pathos, brought to you by Driveway Devi. I'm Karthik on behalf of Driveway Devi, and joining us to discuss this, shed light on it, provide insights, is psychologist Ria Kumar, who is also the founder of her own practice, The Passing Wave, beautiful name. And not only am I grateful that she's joining us and making the time, but in fact, that the theme itself was her idea, for which I'm extremely grateful. So, Ria, thank you very much and welcome.
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I'm super keen to be here and for us to talk about the topic we've already talked about, but I'm excited to share this with the world.
Wonderful. Before we jump into that, though, and as is my practice with most of my guests, we would love to hear in your own words a little bit about your practice.
Okay, yeah. So I started about a year and a half ago, and the main reason was to have some kind of autonomy over my own work because I do think that is important, especially in a field where you yourself are the resource, right? In a sense. So I think that autonomy kind of enables me to do my best work. So that was the reason behind starting a private practice. As far as my practice goes, I tend to gravitate towards something called emotion focused therapy, where the emphasis is on working with emotions. So showing curiosity towards emotions and showing compassion towards emotions and really deepening that experience in that space in therapy so that we can access those more painful, deeper emotions and work through them
Hmm.
to ensure that some kind of transformation does take place.
Wonderful. And how did you come upon the name?
Interestingly, it again ties back to my approach. So, what they say is that transformation takes place when you sort of access your more painful emotions and then work through them and then arrive at maybe healthier emotions yourself through doing that work. And that sort of resembles the motion of a wave to me, in the sense that you're working your way from not accessing those emotions, then those emotions peaking, and then again reaching your baseline. So that's where the name kind of comes from.
Wonderful. That's a perfect balance of poignancy and logic.
Mm,
Okay, now I shared my sort of very rudimentary two pence on my understanding of the importance of the therapist client dynamic and relationship.
mm,
Let's really begin with that central question,
mm.
obvious as it may be. Why is it so important?
The relationship is so important because I think one thing that is very important here is that a lot of the times the reason why we experience pain is because of relationships and the hurt we experience in relationships. So, somewhere therapy becomes the space where that unlearning happens, and the same way, right? Like you got hurt in your relationships, so healing also happens within relationships. So, for that to be a healthy, safe relationship becomes the key driving factor, in fact, in therapy work even happening and for therapy to be effective.
So true. I want to very quickly also share that it's very different from going to a medical professional or a medical doctor for
Hmm,
a physical, purely physical isolated problem. Let's say one has a sprain or an injury or a fracture. There is an extent to which any kind of rapport you may or may not even establish between yourself and the attending physician or specialist even matters, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a fairly clinical kind of procedure,
hmm,
and that'll be the end of that, hopefully. But here, because as you very rightly said, it is all about sentiments, feelings, and emotions. It becomes really, really tricky. You actually kind of preempted one of my questions from later on, so I'm going to ask it. Let's say there is an individual who has really struggled, perhaps on account of a dysregulated attachment style,
hmm,
and therefore exhibits certain kind of behavior in their relationships.
hmm.
Does that tend to also come into the therapeutic space and in the relationship with the therapist? And I'll tell you very quickly, if you allow me, this happened with me and my therapist, where I was essentially blowing my own therapist hot and cold.
Yeah, actually, we do have a word for that as well. It's called transference and counter transference. So it sometimes happens from the therapist side as well. And they do say that whatever happens in the outside world, the therapy space is almost like a microcosm of that. And somewhere, how you relate to other people and the world at large will also somewhere, somehow come up in the therapy room. And it's for the therapist to be attuned and to really pick up on that, to be able to figure out what that may be, that block or that dysregulation, and for us to like address it in session. And I'll give an example, right? If say there is a client that's always seeming spaced out in my sessions with me, and it seems like they're always like not present, their mind is elsewhere, chances are they're showing up in other settings similarly.
Sure.
And that's for me to catch on to and address very directly. And we actually call this here and now work. So when you shift the focus from the content of the client's life and actually start talking about the process that's taking place between therapist and client, that is also very impactful. And that's something we do in sessions.
Thank you for contextualizing that. It really, really helps clarify things. But
Hmm.
just to play devil's advocate, using that very same scenario, it could also be, couldn't it? And one would have to, as the therapist, then be again aware, astute, and perceptive enough to be able to draw a distinction where that individual is not like that in other scenarios, but in fact is that way very specifically in the therapeutic setting for any number of reasons. Maybe they've been, compelled to come against their wishes. They don't really believe in any sort of, merit in the therapeutic journey, etc.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. That can be the case. And I think what is important then is to ensure that you're asking questions where there's room for clarification. So even if I'm asking them, right, like, is this a familiar thing, right? Because it seems like you're not present here with me. Is this something that plays out outside of the therapy room as well? You would leave that room open for them to
Yeah.
be able to counter that and tell you that no, that's not the case. I'm just feeling that way here because, whatever, you may be new to me. I'm not feeling safe here. I'm not comfortable being vulnerable. I don't like the online setup, whatever it may be. But you open that space for them to be able to clarify. You don't assume.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I'm relieved to hear that. Okay, let's talk then a little bit more specifically about what are the possible parameters
Hmm.
on which a therapist would even make certain determinations about the personality type of a new client that they've onboarded. What are some building blocks of this dynamic that you're wanting to establish? Is
Hmm.
it, for example, and one understands that different therapists have their own sort of systems of whether they want to do one discovery session or four or whatever. But
Hmm.
through that initial phase and process, is that when you're also then simultaneously coming to certain determinations about how this individual might be in terms of the dynamic, and therefore setting up that status quo?
I think first things first, I think in a very first session, you do approach the client with curiosity. So when it comes to their individual narrative, you're not working with any assumptions about what personality type they may fit or what conceptualization they may fit. You're just going in there to learn about a person's life story. And I think for that, you need to be very open minded and very curious, at least from the get go. It's only like maybe like a few sessions in when you have a lot more information about their case history, what their life currently looks like, is when you can maybe make certain um, take certain guesses and make certain assumptions
Huh,
about.
but I'm terribly sorry, Ria. I'm going to interrupt you
Hmm,
here because while I completely understand and appreciate that there is a certain process that
hmm,
needs to take place and a certain amount of let's say investigation, for lack
hmm,
of better term, to gather one's facts, etc., and then use those as the building blocks.
hmm.
Um, and I'm going to ask you some really silly questions from a lay perspective. Uh, is it not also the case that at the very outset, and especially at the outset when a person comes in, and particularly in scenarios when it's an individual who's new to this entire thing of therapy itself,
Hmm,
that they are in a very, very guarded, vulnerable space,
hmm.
that it is at that very point that the therapist ought to do something or some things in order to convey a certain conducive environment.
Oh yeah, of course, 100%. And I think those are the building blocks of good therapy work, right? Like conceptualizations, knowledge, techniques aside, I think the first thing is for you to be someone who is eliciting a certain amount of warmth towards the other person and creating an environment that is safe just by being warm yourself to start with. And then also being non-judgmental, right? Like when the other person is sharing with you, when you're being curious rather than making rigid
Inclusive or, huh,
yeah, making rigid assumptions or
right.
jumping to conclusions about them, that helps.
And,
And I
and
think
and I think it might also be then, therefore, you might agree that along with this, I know it's slightly off topic, but
hmm,
significant, therefore, also becomes the physical environment and ambience, and it ought to sort of not be very cold and clinical. It ought to be cossetting and warm, etc.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that does show in the way in-person spaces are designed. Like you will always have a couch and a tissue box, and perhaps the room may have warm colors. So I think that is something that design can also help with. But at least in the online environment, it boils down to the person on the other
Sure,
side of the
sure,
screen.
sure. So, I mean, if I'm really sorry. All these sort of new thoughts
Mm.
are coming to my mind. So, because more and more engagement is taking place online, and for the most part, I feel, despite being old school, that's a good development. Is it not? Is it? Do you see it as a bigger challenge? Not having the aid of physical spaces and other elements in order to build and convey that convivial atmosphere?
Um, so I'll be very honest. I have done in-person sessions and I've done offline work, online work. I do see a difference. I think in person, it's easier to create that holding environment. I think here being on a screen does create a certain amount of distance. Not to say online therapy is ineffective. I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah, neither do I.
Yeah, but I think at least in the online space, there are things you can't control as far as the environment is concerned. But a few things I do keep in mind is ensuring that I've checked in with my client to see if, they have the right privacy to take the session. I've had clients who joined from like a park bench, and then I've had to tell
Wow,
them that maybe this environment is not um,
ideal.
ideal for therapy work.
Yeah,
And then we postponed our session and met at
sure.
another time.
Hmm.
So those kind of things, yes, you need to be mindful and
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
see what's where they are and what's happening.
Right.
Um, and ask them, like you see them sweating, you can ask if they're feeling really hot, or if you see them shaking, you can ask directly, like, I see your leg moving a lot, is something happening? Like those kind of things can be addressed very directly. But I think when it comes to the online environment, there is relatively little control.
When we spoke in the lead up to this session, just in
Mm.
terms of what all we might talk about, there can always be instances where this is I'm using that phraseology. I'm sure it's politically incorrect, but there can be problematic situations, or let's say difficult clients, or clients who are a, a little more peculiar, let's say. Can you contextualize through one or two examples something like that, and then what are some ways in which you navigate those situations in order to, despite those limitations, still have some kind of a positive dynamic going?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I'm understanding 100% correctly, so I think you will figure that out based on how I respond. um, but I think with certain clients, when certain behaviors of theirs or certain ways of relating in them end up becoming like a block to therapy
Yes,
work and how
yes,
we're
yes.
connecting. Um, Even in those cases, gentle confrontation really helps.
Okay.
So it's not like I'm going to be putting them on the spot for certain
Sure.
characteristics they have. But from time to time, I can bring up the fact that there are moments where I feel disconnected to them. And then for us to explore collaboratively what could be going on there.
Okay, that makes sense, and that is precisely, you understood my question correctly, despite my poor articulation. But it leads me to my next question in a perfect segue, which is the word disconnect. Now, there can
Mm.
be a disconnect also between, because at the end of the day it's just two human beings. Now there can be an intellectual disconnect, there can
Mm.
be a cultural disconnect, there can
Mm.
be a status disconnect. I mean, there can be disconnect of so many types.
True.
Talk, if you will, a little bit about some of these disconnects, and again, what might be some ways around.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're correct to say that. I think the disconnect can also come from the fact that they are new to that environment and they're not
Absolutely.
comfortable sharing it. And again, that's when those things I talked about previously come in, that you need to show certain behaviors towards your client as well to ensure that they are feeling a certain amount of felt safety in the relationship. Um, but the disconnect is also to be addressed in little ways.
Hmm.
So, for example, even the fact that we've made that shift now, right, from calling them patients to now calling them clients, is about according a certain amount of respect to them and
Sure.
dignity to them when they come into
Right.
that space. That's also somewhere supposed to ensure that the work is more collaborative rather than me being someone who preaches at them. So that's one. I think then there's also more implicit ways of doing that. I think just in the tone you take, the way you address them, the way you um, articulate things and speak to one another. I think somewhere that also plays a role more implicitly. But from time to time, I think it also needs to be done a lot more explicitly. So if I have clients where I know for a fact that they are seeing some kind of hierarchy here in the therapy room as well, where maybe they are seeing me as some kind of teacher figure or parent figure. I don't know. I don't know how it plays out, but in those cases, I think a very explicit statement can also help for me to be
Hmm.
able to tell them that yes, I may be the expert when it comes to mental health and the theories and the knowledge, etc. But at the end of the day, it's their life, and that's what we're talking about, and that's what we're working with. And as far as that's concerned, I do consider them the expert, and hence what we're doing here is a lot more collaborative rather than, you know, me being the one preaching at them or.
So yeah, I think that's really what sort of encapsulates it for me, which is that entire concept of collaboration, rather than the therapist being some gyani on the top of a mountain sprinkling some magic dust.
Hmm,
There's a niece of mine who's also a well qualified integrative therapist. She's based out of London. And I was talking to her recently, and it so happened that a lot of her initial work experience was with the public schooling system in the UK. And
hmm,
that too, specifically in pockets that had a very large migrant population, Muslim migrant population, extremely modest financially. And she was telling me about these situations where ever so often the disconnect was purely on the basis of the fact that she didn't have even an iota or an inkling of the kinds of lives that and the worlds, their worlds were vastly different from her own.
hmm, hmm,
Is that so? That is one sort of query that's lurking in my head. The
hmm,
other one, which again is disconnect, and I think I might have mentioned it earlier to you, is that, and I'm going to ask this very obnoxious, potentially offensive question, that in India, we continue to be quite sort of obsessed with our medical professionals, especially being old and experienced.
hmm,
And so this whole thing of oh ho ye abhi ladki to kya aake aur hame salah degi, etc.
hmm.
So what about situations such as these?
Yeah, yeah. Again, right, there can be so many factors. It can be about religion, it can be about class, it can be about age, as you rightly mentioned as well. And I've had experiences like that where someone's come in and they've become aware of my age and then perhaps asked me if it would be better for them if they go to someone older. And in those cases, I think there are two ways. I'll be very honest because I'm a human being. Even my first instinct is to get defensive and try to prove my worth that no, I'm a good practitioner. I've done the work. I've done the research. I know everything. But somewhere I feel like as therapists, we do need to prioritize the client's well-being. And
Yeah.
if for them, it's going to be a major block that I'm someone who is significantly younger than them, then I'm very okay to refer them out. And that's one way of addressing it. The second is to just have a very honest conversation on the topic. And age is one thing, right? But even if there are other differences. So, for example, I'm queer affirmative, but I am not a part of the community.
Sure.
And I think in those cases, it's very important for me to also acknowledge my status as an ally,
Mm-hmm.
and bring that in to the conversation so that they can honestly share what that brings up for them. Um, so things like that, right? For it, there to be very authentic, direct conversations. Um, and second, if that is going to be a big block for them, then just swallow your pride and refer them out. Just acknowledge your limits as well. That's the second. And yeah, I think that's mostly what I do to deal with such differences. As far as understanding them is concerned, because you did say that, sometimes the block can be that you don't know what their lived
Yeah,
experience is
yeah,
because
yeah.
you come from a vastly different setting. I think there, what I mentioned earlier, curiosity plays a major role.
Hmm.
Um, as far as your inquiry is open ended and you're actually just trying to enter their world and their frame of reference without making assumptions, I think that can showcase a certain amount of um, empathy, even, right? Like, because yes, I don't know what your lived experience is like, but can I be empathetic? Can I do my best to learn about it with curiosity and with empathy and warmth? I think that's what ends up mattering in the session rather than me knowing exactly what their circumstances are and for me to
Hmm.
also experience that.
My final point of inquiry is more is has a longish context, but the answer is simply yes or no.
Hmm.
Uh, so because at Driveway Devi we perform this bridge service where we connect individuals in distress to an appropriate mental health professional, and so in that process, what we go on and on, hammer and tong about, particularly to clients who are flirting with this for the very first time, is the importance of being mentally prepared to not have a good or ideal experience with therapist one, therapist two, maybe even therapist three, often using and drawing on the analogy of dating. And that it will be well worth it to have that persistence and perseverance to hit and trial method until you arrive upon an individual, a therapist who works for you, because it's this very symbiotic human thing. There is and it is that X factor or that human quality which can often transcend how much ever we may intellectualize and make reasons and powerpoints with logic on how to develop this dynamic. So
Hmm.
my question is, am I right in assuming that above and beyond the conscious and intellectual efforts on both parties' parts, it is entirely possible that for undefinable reasons that a rapport doesn't get formed, and it's fine.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you mentioned, right? Like, even the clients that come to me have had previous experiences with therapists that have been unfortunate. And even if they haven't been outrightly horrible relationships, there has been a sense of I didn't feel fully understood by them.
Correct, correct.
I feel like what they were doing with me was not effective. So that does happen. Um, and obviously, like, even I will not be the right therapist for every client. But I may be the best therapist for some clients. Like,
Sure, sure.
there's no, yeah, it is about the fit ultimately.
Hmm,
And
hmm,
every therapist has a different approach, a different style. There is no one size fits all. Um, and yes, it does boil down to who I am also, and what my leanings are as far as my approach is concerned,
hmm.
and what the client is ready for and what they also desire in their therapist. And I also can't go around changing myself and my style for every
Naturally,
client. Yeah, I have to
naturally.
adapt. I do need to meet them where they're at, but
Right.
there is a certain style and approach that I also have, and I there's only so
I
much
mean,
I can do to
there'll be elements to your way of functioning that are flexible, and then there are certain things that you've thought about more deeply and built your entire thing on it. So,
yeah, my inclination. Yeah.
Wonderful. Is there anything vis-a-vis the therapeutic dynamic that you would like to mention that perhaps we've not discussed, I've not pointedly asked you about?
Mm, nothing off the top of my head, but yeah, I think one thing I do want to address is that I think there's this shift that we've started seeing therapy as this very fast-paced thing that somewhere people do expect results like within a session or two.
Wow.
That does happen. I think somewhere capitalism may play a role there as well. And I think our field is also to blame because a lot of people are marketing it in that manner. But
Yeah, yeah.
I think I just want to put this out there that therapy work is slow work and it does take time, but I think the process is worth it. Um, and yeah, I think that's mainly it. To just be
I think
patient.
that's a very, very important message. And like you said, one comes across so much now, more and more across social media, etc. All kinds of bizarre, frankly, these, promises
Claims, yeah.
made, claims of, resolution in so many sessions for just so much a session and all that jazz. It's quite ludicrous, frankly speaking. In
Yeah, and it's
fact,
very
just,
hard as a therapist to also not lose
yeah,
yourself while the world around you is operating in that manner. But I think,
absolutely.
and that is something I struggle with because clients will come in sometimes and be like, oh, this was ineffective. Like, end of one
Mm,
session, I'm not feeling any change, or
mm,
I
mm.
actually felt uncomfortable rather than feeling better. Like, those things do
Mm.
happen where, they came in with certain expectations and maybe those expectations weren't met immediately because that's not
Sure.
how therapy work goes. Um, but I think just to clear that out that yes, it is effective, but it is also a slow process.
Yeah, I think, and from my perspective, I can also add that not only is it slow, it's arduous. It's no cakewalk.
Hmm.
So you're not going to go and have fun every session.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so
yeah. I've had terminations because of that. Like I've had clients come in and then end of the session be like, "But I'm not feeling any better." I'm like,
I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but yeah, that's a very, very important message. In fact, just to sort of add some humor to this very serious situation, actually, I was reading somewhere, I've forgotten precisely what the line was, but it said something to the effect that from X age, from birth to X age, is what you're doing all the things that you're doing in life, and then from a certain age till the time you're around, you're basically undoing what you did.
yeah,
So, yeah,
unlearning and corrective experiences, right? If you're someone who's only been in unsafe relationships,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's what we're trying to correct. We're trying to make you feel safety for once, and I think that takes time building
yeah.
that
But
trust.
just like in order to be safe in most scenarios, whether you're checking into a flight or whatever, there is
Mm.
that very, very unpleasant security check that takes place. There is going to be an unpleasant phase before you ultimately arrive at that safe space.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and even to experience safety within the therapeutic relationship, right? It does take a certain amount of vulnerability
it
from you
does.
that you may not be comfortable with to start with. But it's about learning that the other person on the other side of the screen can also hold you.
Yeah.
Um, you're not going to be dismissed or hurt for being
Huh.
vulnerable.
I mean, see, again, theoretically, what you're saying is absolutely right. One doesn't doubt its integrity at all, but a lot of people who are coming in there have never felt that and therefore don't know that and therefore don't have any trust in that.
Yeah, and they get suspicious also, right? Like, oh, you're just doing like this is your job.
Yeah,
Like, I'm sure when you take your therapist hat off, you may have like different thoughts about me, or you may be judging me.
yeah.
Like, I've had clients who have reassured on multiple occasions that I'm not judging them. I'm really not judging you. It's okay for us to talk about it. But somewhere that doubt doesn't go away. And perhaps it's not about me, it's about what they have experienced in the past. And that kind of unlearning does take time.
Hmm. I don't know why I have this sneaking feeling that we should put a pause on this now before we say things in public that are regrettable. So, with that very, very important discussion. I would like to once again thank you. We wish the passing wave all the best, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.